Okay, well, we are in, I had to count this, we are in our last and 17th week of More Than Nice series. So if you're new with us, that's not super unusual, actually. It's maybe a little on the long side, but we do tend to take a nice long time with our series. But this is the last week. So, and in fact, next week, Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, and next Sunday we'll be into Lent, and we'll be in a new series. So, and it'll be great. But this is the last week, and really, as I think back on it, there's, especially as a teacher and as someone who's planning and looking at the series, it has been like all the stuff that we didn't get to talk about is how it feels to me. So maybe for you, you're like, yes, when is this going to be over? You know, I'm tired of seeing that slide. But for me, I'm like, man, there was so many things that I feel like we actually didn't get to. And so I'm going to cover all of those things today. So I hope that you don't have lunch plans. We're all going to fast together, and it'll be great. So, no, I'm not going to do that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to start by actually winding the clock back a little bit. About a year ago, I had an introduction where we took a little bit of a vocabulary trivia. I don't know if you were here, if you remember this at all. Okay, so we were introduced to words like gadzookery. Okay, does anyone remember what that meant? No? Okay, that's the deliberate use of old-fashioned language. That was a good one. I do see Timothy back in the back here, so okay. He probably knows all. This was one of my favorites. To groak is to, anyone remember this? This one, huh? There we go. To gaze at a person eating and hope that they'll give you some food, yeah? That was a good one. And then, and the reason why we did this, because I wanted to introduce this word quotidian for that teaching, and which is commonplace. It's a great word for commonplace. That's one that you could actually use in your daily speech and appear, smarter than maybe you actually are. So I commend that to you. But the reason I thought of this is because there was a word in that series that described this. Okay, what word refers to a last-minute tidy-up before the arrival of guests? Does anybody remember what that word is? A scurryfunge. Good job, Timothy. I knew you. Oh, yeah, Paul's got that too. Scurryfunge, a great word. A last-minute tidy-up before the arrival of guests, okay? And I thought of this word because this morning, in this series on More Than Nice, if you're newer with us, what we've really been looking at is how to love one another, what the Bible has to say about loving one another, and the fact that that's really our highest calling as a community and as individuals following Jesus. And so we looked at all these different one another's in the Bible, and we kind of structured them in a way that had like a part 1 and a part 2 and a part 3. And here at the very end, we've got a teaching, kind of this grouping of texts that we started out with that have to do with this word hospitality, okay? Hospitality. And so I thought of scurryfunge because when I think about hospitality, I don't know about you, but that's the first thing I think about is, man, what am I going to have to clean in order to have anybody lay eyes on my house, right? So, does anybody feel that way? I don't know. And this idea of hospitality, I think, is an interesting one as I was going through it. And I feel like this church in particular, I think we're really blessed with some people who are very naturally hospitable. And I thought about some people in particular, and I kind of wrestled with, like, should I name people? Because obviously I can't name everybody, and I'll miss people, and people's feelings might be hurt if I don't say something. But then I thought of Kitty Kramer's teaching the other week, where she encouraged us to just be encouraging, to bless other people. And so I was like, okay, fine. You can get over yourself. My takeaway from it was get over yourself and just, tell people encouraging things. So I was like, yeah, we're so blessed with so many people. I think immediately of Tanya, who I can see, I guess she's not here at the moment, which is fine. But spouses get credit as well. Is one thing I want to say, Doug. We know it's a partnership. Maybe on some things more heavily weighted to one side than the other, but that's all right. But yeah, Tanya is she is like an effortless host, right? Like I think anyone who's been to her house, she literally has hosted our newcomers dessert nights for years and years, and like she's just one of those people that makes it look like this is just like, I don't know, just do this all the time, doesn't even matter. Yeah, come on in, it's great, Can this person come? Of course they can come, yes. She's like never really met a stranger. Her house is beautiful all the time, and she's just so welcoming. It's just awesome, right? She's just so natural at it. I think of Kirk over there as well. Kirk's a little different. Kirk doesn't always have the big smile necessarily, but when you have been at Kirk's house, or if you've been to a party that Kirk has hosted in some way, you can just toss your diet plan or whatever it is, whatever sort of idea you had about food consumption, just throw that out the door, because there will always be about 5 times more food than could possibly be consumed by the people in attendance there, right? And it's a beautiful thing. It is truly, truly a beautiful thing, and I love it. I love every minute of it. And so, we have these people who are naturally really gifted in hospitality, and then there's the rest of us. And I think the rest of us, when we see some of these verses on hospitality, and there's a bunch of them. Here's just here's a few. 1 Peter 4:9. I kind of ran through that a month ago. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. Right? That's like a disqualifier right there. Contribute to the needs of saints and seek to show hospitality. Keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. This is really hard. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers. In fact, that word hospitality has connotations around strangers in particular. For in doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. It's like, strangers? What? And so there's a lot of things where, at least again, for me, when I read these things, I like to try to be hospitable, but it's kind of hard, And again, the first thing I think of is, what am I going to have to clean up? What's going to cost me, etc. How am I going to not look bad when it comes to this, right? And I think about this because I think this morning, as we are going into our text, I think that actually God would have us maybe widen out, maybe broaden out a little bit what our understanding is. Because I do think, on the one hand, for those of you guys who are naturally hospitable, I think a word from the Lord to you might just be to remind you, hey, this is a really good thing. You can love people just by the way you naturally are. And I think it's good to be reminded of that. So that's your reminder, those of you for who that's true. And I think really even for the rest of us, we can be kind of nudged a little bit, right? I think there's an aspect to which we know that, we have maybe some desire to be more hospitable. And it's like sometimes we just need a little bit of encouragement. And so I would encourage that as well, to the extent that that is possible. But I think the main thing that God wants us to talk about this morning is maybe something a little wider and broader than our very Western, and I would say our suburbanized, single-family, fenced understanding of hospitality, okay? And so that's what we're hoping to do this morning. And so in our series here, as I said, we had our first part on living as equals, how when we love one another, it actually starts from an internal space of how we look at each other as equals. And then we kind of moved into this interpersonal idea of grace and forgiveness and speaking to one another, one-on-one interactions. How is it that we can continue to move into this idea of loving each other? And here in this third part, and as we're ending up here, it's really about, as a community, what are the communal things that we think God would be moving amongst us to build this idea of loving one another, this idea of more than nice. So, all right. So, the title is Widening Our Welcome, and we are going to talk about the story of Joseph. So, this has been, the story of Joseph is something that we've used through the whole series. Originally, we were kind of just thinking, oh yeah, we'll just kind of find some biblical characters to help us reference the ideas that we've been talking about on Sunday mornings. And then, as it turns out, Joseph just kind of worked out really well, and Danielle was able to lay out hey, here's how Joseph works into all these different parts of the series, and so it's been really cool, except like our usage of it has been kind of like narrow, right? Like we've sort of just plucked little parts of it out of the story as we go. And so we find ourselves here at the end of our series, and we're actually not very close to the end of the story of Joseph, so, which is okay. But I am actually, there's a lot of laughing coming from my daughter's corner there. So it's slightly distracting for me. I just have to say, thank you so much. Hi, sweetie. So we're not actually that close. The story of Joseph is a whole entire quarter of the book of Genesis, basically. So there's a lot of time devoted to this, a lot of time devoted to it. And we landed, I think, with Kitty a couple weeks ago in chapter 41, I think. And it kind of goes to 50, but really kind of stops in about 46. And so I was praying about this week, and I was like, okay, well, what should we cover here? What should we do? And I really, as I sat with the story, I just got, honestly, captured by it, I think is the best way to put it. I mean, I know the story of Joseph. I've read it since, when I was very young. I grew up in the church. And I don't know, something about it, as I was going through, especially this ending few chapters here, I was just like amazed. Like I was just captured by it. It's very emotional. I found myself actually like crying through different parts of it. So I warn you in advance, I may not have full control over composure this morning. So if that's the case, it's okay. Don't, just ignore that. It's not a big deal. We cry around here. It's not the end of the world. We'll make it. But I was just captured by it, and I was just praying about it. It's like, God, is it like what do I do with this? There's like so much of this. We can't surely. I'm not gonna like go through 3-4 chapters of Genesis. Like that seems insane. And as I was praying about it more and more, he was like, this is the story. And so that's what we're going to just mostly read. I'll make a couple of remarks through it. But we're mostly going to read through, it's about 3.5 chapters. I'll skip a couple little spots, but it's the bulk of the text of Genesis here. And at the end of that, I'm going to make a couple of central point, or really just one central point that comes out of the story for our purposes this morning. But there's a lot of things in the story. There are a lot of things that could be said. There's so many lessons and all that. And so as we go through it, just take it in. Just kind of sit in it. And my hope is that you'll get a little bit of a sense for just the amazing thing that God has put here in Scripture for us. And so this is going to be starting in chapter 41 at the end, just to kind of set us some context, right? So Joseph, as we've been through, he's had a heck of a ride in his life, and we'll refer back to a lot of that in the story. And here he is in Egypt. He has become the second in command to Pharaoh, and he has these dreams and that he's interpreted, and sure enough, those dreams are coming true, and he's managing the entire kingdom, the most powerful kingdom in the whole world. And so we pick this up in Genesis 41. So it says, at the last 7 years of the bumper crops throughout the land of Egypt came to an end, and then 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had predicted. The famine also struck all the surrounding countries, but throughout Egypt there was plenty of food, right? They had saved up for it. And so eventually, however, the famine spread throughout the land of Egypt as well, and when the people cried out to Pharaoh for food, he told them, go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you to do. So with the severe famine everywhere, Joseph opened up the storehouses and distributed grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout the land of Egypt, and people came from all around Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because of the famine, and was severe throughout the world, it says, right? And so that's the context, right? We're in the end of the story here, and Joseph is managing really a global crisis, essentially, is what he's doing. And he's been able to do this because God has been with him, and so he's in this position of power. So here in chapter 42, when Jacob heard, Joseph's dad, right? When Jacob heard that the grain was available in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why are you standing around looking at one another? I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy enough grain to keep us alive. Otherwise, we'll die." Right? So at this point, Jacob's family is pretty big. Like he's got his 12 sons, he's got their wives, he's got their children, right? There's something like, 60 or 70 people at least, just in his family, not to mention other people and livestock and all that. And so he's worried about them. And so it says, so Joseph's 10 older brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain, but Jacob wouldn't let Joseph's younger brother, Benjamin, go with them for fear some harm might come to him. So Jacob's sons arrived in Egypt along with the others to buy food, for the famine was in Canaan as well. Canaan is where they lived. And so Benjamin, if you recall, Benjamin is Joseph's younger brother, and he is the one of two sons that Jacob had with what he'll refer to later as his wife, right? Now, Jacob actually had another wife, and actually his first two sets of sons came from maidservants of his wives. But Jacob, as we talked about at the beginning of the series, had a pretty big problem with favoritism. And really, in his mind, he had one wife, and that was the last one, the one he actually went after in the beginning. And her two sons, the last two sons, are the ones that he favored the most. And so Joseph, as far as he's concerned, is dead. It's gone. And Benjamin, the youngest, is the only one left. And so you can see that he is very, very much attached to Benjamin and will not let Benjamin go anywhere with these other 10 brothers. All right? So since Joseph was governor of all of Egypt and in charge of selling grain to all the people, it was to him that his brothers came. And when they arrived, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph recognized his brothers instantly, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where are you from?" he demanded. "From the land of Canaan," they replied. "We have come to buy food." And although Joseph recognized his brother, they didn't recognize him. And he remembered the dreams he had about them many years before, and he said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see how vulnerable our land has become." And so this is, again, just picking up from the story before that, Joseph had been sold into slavery by his brothers. I don't know what they thought happened to him. I don't know if they think that he was alive or dead. They told his father that he was dead or torn to pieces or something. But they had sold him into slavery, and Joseph had risen to power. It's reasonable to believe that Joseph, this is about 22 years later. He was 17 when they sold him into slavery. Now he's a full-grown man that looked like an Egyptian, talked like an Egyptian. He's speaking their language. He's wearing the full garb of an Egyptian. And so they don't recognize him, but he recognizes all of them right away. And so there begins this dance that we're going to see over time here. He calls them spies, and they're getting scared here. He says, "No, my lord," they exclaim, "your servants have simply come to buy food. We are all brothers, members of the same family. We are honest men, sir. We are not spies." "Yes, you are," Joseph insisted. "You have come to see how vulnerable our land has become." "Sir," they said, "there are actually 12 of us. We, your servants, are all brothers, son of a man living in the land of Canaan. Our youngest brother is back there with our father right now, and one of our brothers is no longer with us." Ironic, right? But Joseph insisted, "As I said, you are spies, and this is how I will test your story." So he begins this testing process. "I swear by the life of Pharaoh that you will never leave Egypt unless your youngest brother comes here. One of you must go and get your brother. I'll keep the rest of you here in prison. Then we'll find out whether or not your story is true. By the life of Pharaoh, it turns out that you don't have a younger brother, then I'll know you are spies." And so Joseph kind of changes his mind a little bit, makes it a little easier. A couple verses later, speaking among themselves, they say, "Clearly, we are being punished because of what we did to Joseph long ago. We saw his anguish when he pleaded for his life, but we wouldn't listen. That's why we're in this trouble." "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy?" Reuben asked. "But you wouldn't listen, and now we have to answer for his blood." It's like a like an I told you so, but if you actually look back at what Reuben said or didn't say, he actually didn't, that's not exactly how that worked. Um, but to Peggy's great point with us last week, right? Wouldn't it have been awesome if, in fact, Reuben had spoken up with some truth at that time, but he did not. But now they're all recognizing this idea that, oh man, we're in trouble. And maybe the reason why, or actually they're convinced of the reason why, is because of what they had done to Joseph. So of course, they didn't know that Joseph understood them, for he had been speaking to them through an interpreter. And now he turned away from them and began to weep. See, like I said, it's emotional story here. He began to weep. And when he regained his composure, he spoke to them again. And then he chose Simeon from among them and had him tied up right before their eyes. And so Joseph ordered his servants to fill the men's sacks with grain, but he also gave secret instructions to return each brother's payment at the top of his sack. And he gave them supplies for the journey home, and so the brothers loaded their donkeys with grain and headed for home. But when they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to get grain for his donkey, and he found money in the top of his sack. "Look," he exclaimed to his brother, "my money has been returned. It's here in my sack." And then their hearts sank. Trembling, they said to each other, "What has God done to us?" And when the brothers came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him everything that had happened to them. And they recount the story over the next few verses. And then later on, as they emptied out their sacks, there in each man's sack was the bag of money he had paid for the grain. So it wasn't just one of them that got the money back. All of them got their money back. And the brothers and their father were terrified when they saw the bags of money. Jacob exclaimed, "You are robbing me of my children. Joseph is gone, Simeon is gone, and now you want to take Benjamin too. Everything is going against me." And then Reuben said to his father, "You may kill my 2 sons. If I don't bring Benjamin back to you, I'll be responsible for him, and I promise to bring him back." But Jacob replied, "My son will not go down with you. His brother Joseph is dead, and he is all I have left. If anything should happen to him on your journey, you would send this grieving, white-haired man to his grave." Wow. So, flipping the page. But famine continued to ravage the land of Canaan. And when the grain they had brought from Egypt was almost gone, Jacob said to his sons, "Go back and buy us a little more food." They're desperate, right? They were not desperate enough to, not get Simeon out of jail, but now they're getting there, okay? But Judah reminds them and says, "No, this man was serious when he warned us. You won't see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you send Benjamin with us, we'll go down and buy more food. But if you don't let Benjamin go, we won't go either. We can't go," right? Remember, the man said, "You won't see my face again unless your brother is with you." So Jacob moaned, "Why are you so cruel to me? Why did you tell him you had another brother?" And Judah says, "The man just kept asking us questions about our family," he replied. And he asked, "Is your father still alive? And do you have another brother?" Which that's not in the text, but maybe he asked that. Maybe Judah's just covering. I don't know. So we answered his questions. "How could we know?" He would say, "Bring your brother down here." And so Judah said to his father, "Send the boy with me, and we will be on our way. Otherwise, we will all die of starvation, not only we, but you and our little ones. I personally guarantee his safety. You may hold me responsible if I don't bring him back to you. Then let me bear the blame forever." And so we're seeing both Reuben and then now Judah. They're starting to take some responsibility here, right? I mean, you can really see that. They're like, we're in desperate times. We're gonna, in some measure, right? Something's moving in their hearts to kind of own some things and start to take responsibility and start to step up to what might have to happen here. And so, a few verses later, the men packed Jacob's gifts. They had agreed to bring some gifts. Jacob is like trying to pour on the favor in whatever way that he can do. And so there's gifts and double the money that they had brought back with them and headed off with Benjamin. And so they finally arrived in Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph. And when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the manager of his household, "These men will eat with me this noon. Take them inside the palace. Then go and slaughter an animal and prepare a big feast." So the man did as Joseph told him and took them into Joseph's palace. The brothers were terrified when they saw that they were being taken into Joseph's house. They're like, this should not be part of the plan, right? It's because of the money someone put in our sacks last time we were here. He plans to pretend that we stole it, and then he will seize us and make us slaves and take our donkeys. I'm glad you think that's funny too, because I thought it was like, I don't know. That's maybe not the first thing that I would be thinking about, but it's important to them. It's like maybe they had Camaro donkeys and they were just really, really afraid of those being seized. But the brothers approached the manager of Joseph's household and spoke to him at the entrance of the palace. Sir, they said, we came to Egypt once before to buy food, but as we were returning home, we stopped for the night and opened our sacks. Then we discovered that each man's money, the exact amount paid, was in the top of his sack. Here it is. We have brought it back with us, and we have also additional money to buy more food. We have no idea who put the money in our sacks. And surprisingly, the household manager tells them, relax, don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, must have put this treasure into your sacks. I know I received your payment. And then he released Simeon and brought him out to them. So the manager led the men into Joseph's palace. He gave them water, washed their feet, and provided food for their donkeys. Fantastic. And they were told that they would be eating there, so they prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon. And when Joseph came home, they gave him the gifts they had brought him, and they bowed low to the ground before him, once again, just like the dream in the beginning. And after greeting them, he asked, how is your father, the old man you spoke about? Is he still alive? Yes, they replied, our father, your servant, is alive and well. And they bowed low again. And then Joseph looked at his brother Benjamin, the son of his own mother. Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about? Joseph asked. May God be gracious to you, my son. And then Joseph hurried from the room because he was overcome with emotion for his brother. And he went into his private room where he broke down and wept. And after washing his face, he came back out, keeping himself under control. And then he ordered, bring out the food. Joseph told each of his brothers where to sit, and to their amazement, he seated them according to age, from oldest to youngest. And Joseph filled their plates with food from his own table, giving Benjamin 5 times as much as he gave the others. So they feasted. I don't know how he eats that. I don't know. But so they feasted and drank freely with him. He's giving Benjamin honor in that, right? So there's this reunion. One side knows it, the other side doesn't. And you could just see in Joseph, right? There's a lot of things going on in the story that we could talk about, of course. And some people have talked about, like, why is Joseph kind of doing this? What's the point of this kind of back and forth thing? And there'll be more as we go on here. And it's not really the point of our teaching today to try to deal with that. I just want to point out for you guys that where Joseph's heart is at, right? I mean, clearly he's become overcome with emotion. He is happy to see his brothers. Maybe he's trying to figure out what to do with that. But God has worked something in his heart over these last 22 years to where he is like just overcome by the fact that his brothers are in front of him. And he's giving them this big feast. They eat and drank freely with him. And here in the next chapter, as his brothers are getting ready to leave, Joseph gives them one more test. He gives these instructions to his palace manager: fill each of their sacks with as much grain as they can carry, and put each man's money back into his sack. And then put my personal silver cup at the top of the youngest brother's sack, along with the money for his grain. So the manager did as Joseph instructed him. And the brothers were up at dawn and were sent on their journey with their loaded donkeys. But when they had gone only a short distance and were barely out of the city, Joseph said to his palace manager, chase after them and stop them. When you catch up with them, ask them, why have you repaid my kindness with such evil? Why have you stolen my master's silver cup, which he uses to predict the future? What a wicked thing you have done. When the palace manager caught up with the men, he spoke to them as he had been instructed. And the brothers responded, what are you talking about? We are your servants. We would never do such a thing. Didn't we return the money we found in our sacks? We brought it all the way back from the land of Canaan. Why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If you find his cup with any one of us, let that man die, and all the rest of us, my lord, will be your slaves. "That's fair," the man replied, "but only the one who stole the cup will be my slave. The rest of you may go free." So they all quickly took their sacks from the backs of their donkeys and opened them. Right? They think they're innocent. They are innocent. And the palace manager searched the brothers' sacks from the oldest to the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. And when the brothers saw this, they tore their clothing in despair. And they loaded their donkeys again and returned to the city. Right, they had wanted to get rid of Joseph, right? 22 years ago, the favoritism that Jacob displayed to Joseph was thick. And they hated Joseph for that, right? That was the whole point. The reason they sold Joseph into slavery, the reason they did this wicked thing, was because they were jealous. They hated the fact that their father loved this other son so much more than him. But here with Benjamin, same thing's true, maybe more true, right? I imagine for Jacob, having lost Joseph, that he was even more attached to Benjamin, loved him even more than before, and probably held a bunch of things against the other brothers for the fact of where they were at. And so their response here is not that they're happy to get rid of Benjamin. They did not say, "Oh, great, now we can get rid of the other brother that's caused us all these troubles." No, they tore their clothes in despair. Something's changing in their hearts, right? Something has changed. So Joseph was still in his palace when Judah and his brothers arrived, and they fell to the ground before him. "What have you done?" Joseph demanded. "Don't you know that a man like me can predict the future?" And Judah answered, "Oh, my lord, what can we say to you? How can we explain this? How can we prove our innocence? God is punishing us for our sins. My lord, we have all returned to be your slaves, all of us, not just our brother who had your cup in his sack." "No," Joseph said, "I would never do such a thing. Only the man who stole the cup will be my slave. The rest of you may go back to your father in peace," which of course he knows they cannot do. And so here in chapter 45, we start one of the most remarkable passages. This is an incredible thing. Judah stepped forward and said, "Please, my lord, let your servant say just one word to you. Please do not be angry with me, even though you are as powerful as Pharaoh himself. My lord, previously you asked us, your servants, 'Do you have a father or a brother?' And we responded, 'Yes, my lord. We have a father who is an old man, and his youngest son is a child of his old age. His full brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him very much. And you said to us, "Bring him here so I can see him with my own eyes." But we said to him, "My lord, the boy cannot leave his father, for his father would die." But you told us, "Unless your youngest brother comes with you, you will never see my face again." So we returned to your servant, our father, and told him what he had said. And later he said, "Go back again and buy some more food." And we said, "We can't go back unless our youngest brother goes with us. We'll never see the man's face unless he's with us." And then my father said to us, "As you know, my wife had 2 sons, and one of them went away and never returned. Doubtless he was torn to pieces by some wild animal. I have never seen him since. Now if you take his brother away from me, and any harm comes to him, you will be sending this grieving white-haired man to his grave. And now, my lord, I cannot go back to my father without the boy. Our father's life is bound up in the boy's life. If he sees the boy is not with us, our father will die, and we, your servants, will indeed be responsible for sending that grieving white-haired man to his grave. My lord, I guaranteed to my father that I would take care of the boy. And I told him, if I don't bring him back to you, I will bear the blame forever. So please, my lord, let me stay here as a slave instead of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. For how can I return to my father if the boy is not with me? I couldn't bear to see the anguish this would cause my father." It's this moving, impassioned speech that Judah gives. And there's so many echoes really in this whole story, so many archetypes of what Jesus ends up doing for us in the stories. But this is Joseph's response here. Chapter 45. He could not stand it any longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you." So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. And he broke down and wept. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. "I am Joseph," he said to his brothers. "Is my father still alive?" Right? He's already asked this multiple times, but now with the veil gone, with all the trickery and testing gone, he asks it again. "Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. "Please come closer," he said to them. So they came closer, and he said again, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery into Egypt. But don't be upset, and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. And this famine that has ravaged the land for 2 years will last 5 more years, and there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God has sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive and to preserve many survivors. So it was God who sent me here, not you. And he is the one who made me an advisor to Pharaoh, the manager of his entire palace, and the governor of all of Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and tell him, this is what your son Joseph said. God has made me master over all the land of Egypt. So come down to me immediately. You can live in the region of Goshen, where you can be near me with all of your children and grandchildren, your flocks and your herds and everything you own. I will take care of you there, for there is still 5 years of famine ahead of us. Otherwise, you and your household and all your animals will starve." And then Joseph said, "Look, you can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that I really am Joseph." Right? I think he proves to them in some way physically, "I'm Joseph, I really am him. Go tell my father of my honored position here in Egypt. Describe for him everything you have seen, and then bring my father here quickly." Weeping with joy, he embraced Benjamin, and Benjamin did the same. And then Joseph kissed each of his brothers and wept over them, every single one of them. And after that, they began to talk freely with him. And the story goes on, and I'll just read one little last excerpt here. And they left Egypt and returned to their father and told him that Joseph is alive. And Jacob is stunned by the news. And finally, after they tell him everything, it says in verse 28, Jacob exclaimed, "It must be true. My son Joseph is alive. I must go and see him before I die." What a story. And I really did. When I sat through this week, it was like I hadn't read it before. I was like, wow, so much happens here. And there's a lot of things we could address in there. I think one of them, just a little piece in there about God sending Joseph there in advance. There could be things that we could talk about in there, just theologically, that would be good to unpack. If you have questions about that, I'd be happy to chat about that. But there's really one main thing that I just want us to see this morning. And that is, first, that there's estrangement all throughout the story, right? There's estrangement all throughout the story. Joseph and his brothers are obviously estranged, right? The brothers have not seen him in 22 years. They had done something themselves. It was their fault. And so I don't know if you've ever been in a spot where you've been so estranged from someone that actually you didn't even recognize them, right? So much time has passed, so much distance has gone by that you wouldn't even know it was them if you ran into them on the street. Maybe someone that it was close, right? But there's this estrangement that we see so clearly throughout the story. There's an estrangement that the brothers have with their father, right? And you can see that evidenced all through the story. Their relationship with Jacob, even though they're physically in the same place, they lived with each other, there's obviously this relational gap and this distance and this lack of love and trust that has been born out of years of fruit on both sides, probably. And so there's estrangement there, and there's estrangement, really we see clearly in these chapters, there's estrangement between them and God. Right? Ultimately, they're feeling that they don't deserve to be favored or in the presence of God in any way. Their version of what God's attitude towards them is that they've committed all these sins, they've done all these things wrong, and that God is who they believe in, right? They know he's real. They even honor him as best as they can. But their version of him says that God is up there just waiting for just the right opportunity to punish me for all of the sins that I have committed. That's their version of what God is. And I just wonder if that's the version of God they had, could they be anything other than estranged from God? I mean, that would be the natural assumption. And to the extent that that's our assumption of what God is like, that he's just up there waiting to punish us for the things that we've done wrong, or waiting for karma or something to revisit us, if that's our version of our relationship with God, then I would venture to say there probably wouldn't be one. We'd be estranged from God. Kitty, a couple weeks ago, it was a snow day, so not all of you were here. Hopefully some of you went back and watched it online. But she shared with us, oh, I thought I rearranged that. Let's see if we can. Now my slide's not working. I'm not sure why. But is there more on there? Okay. Well, Kitty shared with us. Let me see if I can get to bubbles. No. There we go. There's the bubbles. Kitty did this. She drew these masterful drawings, which I thought were so great. And it's just a picture, I think, of, and you'll have to go back to her teaching to get the full version of this. But there's just this picture of how we sort of view one another, right? That here's me in my bubble, and here's everybody else, and everybody's in their own bubbles, right? And I just thought of this because I was like, isn't this a great picture of estrangement? Because one of the things I felt God wanted us to hear is that in some respects, and to some degree, we are all estranged from each other. We're all estranged from each other to some extent. I mean, even if you think about this, even the people that we're closest with, sometimes especially the people we're closest with, right? But even people that we actually would say, no, we've got pretty good relationships with, and we in this room, many of us do have really good relationships with each other. But when you match it up to what we've talked about many times, especially last year a lot in John, that God, what Jesus is wanting for us, what he's praying for us is a type of unity, a type of oneness that is best exemplified by the unity that the Father and the Son have together. The unity amongst the Trinity. That is what Jesus prays for us. When we hold it up to that, then I think it's fair to say we are all estranged from each other in some way, to some degree. And so it looks like that, right? We might even be in the same space, but we're in our bubbles in some way, shape, or form. And this was her second bubble. That, in fact, we feel often squeezed by other people's bubbles, right? But in this idea of estrangement, what we see in the story is that the thing that ultimately turns the table on estrangement is, and leads us to this idea of being able to one another, right? Where the bubbles start to meet and we can interact in the shared space. The thing that meets that, and my slides are obviously messed up here. I'm going to have to go back. Sorry. Let me just say this, is welcome, right? Welcome overcomes estrangement. You guys remember in our story here, it's in chapter, I didn't have anybody pull out their Bibles, so you're not looking at it. But in verse 4 of chapter 45, what does Joseph say to them when it all breaks down, when the inflection point in the story happens? He says to them, come near me, come near me, come close to me. And what he goes on to do, basically, is address their need for safety. He says, I know that you're feeling scared right now, but it's okay. You're welcome here. You're safe with me. You can come close to me. And it's that welcome that overcomes all these years of estrangement that they've had between them. Welcome overcomes estrangement. And that comes in a lot of different forms, you guys. It's not just about bringing people into your house, as it turns out. It's actually about every time that we interact, and every time there's an opportunity to be in each other's spaces. Every time that God brings us in proximity, and how it is that we are able to interact and how it is that we're able to recognize that maybe there is some estrangement going on whatever level, whether it's with a stranger that you've never met. And I do believe that for some of us, we're called into greater degrees of welcoming strangers into our lives and being much more open-handed and generous with people that maybe we've never even thought of being welcoming to, right? There's that end of the spectrum. And then there's all the way on the other end of the spectrum of just even with the people who you're closest with, the people in your household. How is it that our welcome can overcome the estrangement that we are sometimes in? And sometimes a lot of things have to happen before welcome. You see that in the story, right? There's a lot of things that go on. But that welcome is the inflection point. That's what I want you guys to hear this morning. That has to happen at some point. Somebody has to open their arms and say, you belong here with me. You can come in. You're safe to be here with me. So that's what we want to be as a community. We want to be in a community of people that's growing in our ability to do that. And so we are going to, I don't know why that's there either. Okay. That was a long time ago. There we go. Thank you. So our exercise for this morning, worship team can come on up here. And this is, I'd invite you to maybe spend some more time. We don't have time this morning to spend much time with it here, but I'd invite you to spend some time with it this week. Welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you. That's from Romans 15:7, where he's painted this beautiful picture of what that community would look like. And so I want you to reflect on the ways that you've experienced the welcome of Jesus, right? And that includes, oftentimes that comes through other people. Reflect on the ways you've experienced the welcome of Jesus. Part of what that verse means, I think, and this might come as an offense to you, I don't know. I don't necessarily mean it that way, but you only have to be as welcoming as Jesus, as you've experienced the welcome of Jesus for yourself. And so it's actually pretty important that you reflect on the ways that you've experienced the welcome of Jesus. I think that's where this starts. And then after that, let's ask God if there are places of estrangement that can use your welcome, where your welcome could come into play for this loving one another to happen. And then just kind of as a cycle, then invite Jesus to show more of how he welcomes all of us, okay?